Okay, so as Melanie mentioned, I am joined today by Twana Young, our VP of Curriculum and Instruction, and we're going to chat through a whole bunch of stuff today connected to learning loss and a whole sort of thing, things connected to that in SD Math. But Twana, before we dive into all that, can you share a little bit about your kind of background in education, and any other sort of relevant stuff that you think, and a little bit maybe about kind of what you're doing right now as well, because we will talk a little bit about that. I know it's super secret, but we are going to talk about it a bit. All right. So,
All
so just who, what, where, when, and how.
all right. Well, thank you so much, Nigel, and thank you everybody for being here. So as Nigel said, my name's Twana Young, and I have spent about 20 something years in education. Before I came to Mind, I was a math director, math and science and technology director for a large urban district. I spent 18 years of my career doing urban education as a teacher and an administrator. And so that's kind of where my passion is really like on issues of equity and helping students, all students, to understand who they are as mathematicians and that they can do math. I think that's one of the things that I heard the most often, and I'm sure you guys have heard that too from families saying they're not math people and students saying that. And so that's been my passion of what I've been really focused on my entire career. So I taught middle school, and so that was really pervasive among the kids that felt like they had reached the height of their math ability in elementary school. And so just overcome those. And that kind of leads into what I'm doing now. I'm really working on developing curriculum and resources that change the narrative for kids and open doors and help them understand that they are capable of being confident problem solvers. They're capable of solving really interesting math problems, and that they are math people. And so we're doing a lot of work around equity, around developing student agency, and around just kind of flipping things from this sort of deficit-based lens that we see things in often to a more asset-based lens. So um, that was a whole lot, but that's kind of who I am. I've had a long journey and what I'm doing now. So
Cool. So I'm glad you mentioned that whole sort of like deficit lens thing, because obviously one of the, massive challenges with the pandemic and obviously this last year, which has been, it's not, beat around the bush, it's been a heck of a year, right, for everybody. And in so many ways, it's been a massive challenge. Teachers, school systems have risen to that challenge. They've done amazing things to get through it. And obviously students also have often risen to the challenge and kind of had to do things that they've never been used to doing before. But we're sort of, we're in this position now where a lot of people are looking at this thing they're calling learning loss and wondering like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And I know I have a fourth grade, my son's in fourth grade, my daughter's in first grade. My son actually did totally fine with learning through the pandemic remotely. He was okay. He played Fortnite and he did school all online, and he was a-okay with the whole lot of it, right? My daughter in first graders in Zoom school was just not a super happening situation, right? So I get it. I mean, even here where I'm able to help and do all that stuff, still it's a real struggle. And she definitely, there's a lot of stuff that she didn't sort of get to in the same way that she normally would. So Twana, I'm curious as to your thoughts. First up, even just about the term learning loss, and I know we've had some internal discussions about this. I'm just curious as to your thoughts about that, and then we can talk maybe about, how we might address some of those issues, which are very real. But I'm curious first about just this term learning loss.
yeah, the term learning loss, I try not to use it because I feel like that is coming from a deficit kind of lens. Like we're highlighting all the losses, which there are losses. Like right there are kids that had some struggles this year. There are kids that did really well, and but there were lots of things gained in this year
Mm,
by kids. There was some resiliency gained. There was some creativity and ways of figuring out how to do things that were gained, things that don't look like what we normally would call it. And so when we focus on the word loss and the learning loss, then that is sending messages to kids. And I always talk about, like, what are the headlines that we're sending? With the messages and the way we word things? And so when we send this sort of headline that's learning loss, then you're sending the message to kids that they're already in this place that they have to overcome. And yes, kids feel that way, but let's call out the things that they have gained, and let's use those things as a way to bridge the gap. Let's call out the resiliency that they've had, the perseverance that they've had, the different ways of thinking that they've had. Um, all of those things are helping the students to build a really good perspective of who they are. And believe it or not, that really helps with math. There was one of the things I like to talk about is, I think it was 2008 or 9, the National Math Panel Advisory Board, like, they did this whole big study on what the case of mathematics in the United States and why are we struggling. And one of the findings that they found in that study was that, and we all know this, if you're an educator, you know this, that the students' belief in their ability to do math is directly related to their ability to do math. So if we're
Right.
running around, yeah, if we're running around talking about you have this gap, you have this loss, then all that's doing is telling the student that they can't do it. And instead, that's why we got to change this language. And we have to, it's not that we're not acknowledging that there are
Hmm.
things that happen and there's learning that needs to happen, because absolutely, let's acknowledge that. But let's change the headline so that we can help students realize that it's not something that's too hard to overcome. And I think the
Right.
emphasis on the loss makes it feel like it's too hard to overcome.
Right. So yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, I've also got a problem with this term, from the sense that it also, to some extent, implies that they kind of learned it and then it went away, which I don't think describes the situation very accurately for most kids at all. Like, the term unfinished learning, or stuff we didn't get to, is a more accurate description, because learning loss also implies that what you need to do to get it back is kind of like this much. Like, we had it, we learned it, and we just need to kind of get it back. And that's not kind of the situation in some circumstances here. So we can dive into that. I wanted to kind of, we talked a lot about equity, and there are obviously a lot of interesting sort of things, and I wanted to get your take here, because I'm obviously, and we'll dive into some real STMath specific stuff in a moment. But Twana, you mentioned you're at the moment kind of exploring building new tools, new things to kind of help kids really kind of see themselves in the math and kind of bring that to kids in a big way. And I wanted to just look at, some of the thoughts that have been out there around this whole discussion of sort of equity and equality. And there've been memes like this one online, where it's like, okay, this is what equality means, and this is what equity means. And there's another one that kind of looks like this, where it's like, okay, this is equality, this is equity. And it's like, I have some serious issues with some of these memes. One of them being that there are three things here that kind of like, yeah, it's like, okay, nice idea. Like, okay, everyone wants to see over the fence. If we give everybody a box, that doesn't actually help the situation, doesn't make it, it might be equal, but it's not equitable. And okay, by redistributing the boxes. But one of the challenges here, and this kind of goes to your kind of earlier point, is that whenever we're thinking about, say, education through this sort of lens, we're really thinking about it as a deficit model, because the whole point here is we're kind of saying, well, this person is able to see over the fence, this person has a deficit, they need help to see over the fence. So it's kind of viewing the students through that kind of lens. And then the other problem here is this, I think is very relevant as we go forward. um, this whole idea here, this is like a zero-sum game, right? That equity means, oh, the only way of actually doing this is to take boxes away from one person to give them to others, because this is a zero-sum game, which is really not the point here either. But it's like these memes are very popular, and they seem on the surface profound, but they actually really kind of don't get that deep. And I think also there's this challenge of like, really, this is the best end zone, is that they've got these boxes. What if the wall is bigger? Then nobody can see over it. That's not a particularly great end zone either, right? So there are real challenges with these things, the way that we're thinking about equity. And I just want to sort of reframe that, because I think this is then relevant to the way that we look at the types of materials that we can use to help kids. So imagine, we've got each child, we've got these different trees, right? Students A, B, and C, and the trees are different heights. Student A really doesn't need a ladder, doesn't need any help. Student B, maybe a bit. Student C, quite a lot. And in the traditional model of what we were just looking at, you'd kind of distribute these ladders, something like this, and you'd go, right, this is now equitable. Everybody can reach the trees. But the problem here is what we aren't really doing is we're not really thinking very deeply about the ladder. And the cool thing is that with technology, and this is why it's so relevant, Twana, to everything that you're doing in terms of building materials and everything that I know I've done in the past with R&D in terms of looking at educational materials and how we can develop them, we can do awesome things. And to sort of, use an analogy here, technology is not static. This might be the best ladder from 100 years ago, but for example, there are some pretty cool, awesome ladders available today that can do really remarkable things. So this one, for example, can actually be all three of these things. So if you were sort of, to complete this analogy, give everybody one of these awesome, amazing ladders, then they could all use it in whatever way they needed to do whatever they needed to. So the point being here, it's not a zero-sum game if you can figure out how to do things really, really differently. And obviously, the analogy here is this is what we can do if we can build these educational tools that can really change the game. And obviously in ST Math, we've been doing this for about 20 years and we're still very much so. I know, Twana, you spoke a little about your background. I'll just do a little bit about myself and then we can dive into some other pieces here. So I also was an educator. I taught high school math for many, many years and then worked at LAUSD as a math director for a while, secondary math. And then I joined Mind Research about 11 years ago because I walked into a classroom and saw 42 kids engaged in a level of critical thinking in a sixth grade classroom in South Central Los Angeles that blew my mind. And I was like, wow, I need to go and build games with the penguin. So I've been doing that ever since. And it was very much, I saw this vision. I mean, not this ladder, but I saw this vision of education as this ladder. Straight away, I was like, oh my God, we can do something here that can change the game. So while everybody else is kind of arguing about kind of how to redistribute these old ladders, we're like, no, let's just build a new and better ladder. And that's kind of what we can do here. That's the capacity of what we're able to do. So, all right, here's a little question. And Twana, I know you taught, you've also, I'm pretty certain done, well, I know you certainly have with Mind, done a lot of teacher training. And I'm sure you probably did quite a bit when you were at the district, right? This is something that, yeah, and I'm sure we've all probably, Jim, if you're a math coach, this is something you were very familiar with. Elaine, I'm sure you've also done a heck of a lot of teacher training in your time. So this is a question, obviously, that we grapple with a lot. And as we struggle with these equity issues, as we struggle with learning loss, we do tend to get sort of stuck into, oh, how are we going to fix this? How are we going to solve this problem? And so often, the traditional solutions to, say, learning loss and so forth tend to be, okay, math is a set of skills. Let's assess where the kids are on all these skills, and then we'll figure out which ones they can't do. We'll help them to do them. And then, hey, that means they've learned math. Twana, I got a simple question for you. What do you feel is wrong with that as a picture I'm just, I know that's a pretty softball question there, but like kind of that, unfortunately, I know it's a softball question, but the crazy thing is that literally seems to be the model for the way that everybody right now is thinking about how they're going to do learning loss, right? Because we know, we're hearing it, we're seeing it. They're saying, oh, math is a set of skills, diagnose, figure out what's missing, fix what's missing, boom, we're done with math, right? So I'm curious to get your take on kind of like, okay, what's wrong with that picture?
I think there's a lot wrong with that. I think, that's a thing that we naturally run to, right? That's it. Let's find the problem, let's diagnose it, let's fix it. But that's assuming that math is like this checklist of things that, you do you have this? Yep. Do you have this? Yep. And nope, you don't have this. Let me fill this in. And that's not really how math works. It is like a web of just content and the way that kids make meaning. And so when we do something like that, we lose this idea of how do kids actually learn? How do they make meaning? And so we need to kind of look at that and see um, where they're at. And it also is a deficit way of thinking. I need to figure
Right.
out what the problem is and fix it. It gives this message that our kids are broken and we need to fix them. But there are, if we look at how kids learn and how math is this web of knowledge and how kids make meaning, then we can find things that connect. So, okay, maybe you don't know how to add and subtract fractions, but let me look at what you do know how to do. You've got equivalent fractions. Can I take that and build
Mm,
on it? And it's not about a filling of a gap, but it's more of about of like a expanding on the knowledge that you already have. And let's look at how you're learning. And I think that's the right way to approach it, is to think about, how do kids construct knowledge? How are they learning? And that's how we need to approach it, and not just like, let me figure out what's wrong with you and let me try to fix it, which is that kind of deficit model approach.
right, right. And funnily enough, Twana, you know that we did not synchronize this that closely earlier on, but you actually literally basically said my next question, because the whole point here is, yeah, instead of this, how are we teaching, we really need to kind of dive into how do kids actually learn, right? Instead of how do we teach, how do we learn? And kind of like you said, well, I guess this is, this is what we're trying to do with ST Math. It's always, what if math could be taught in the way the brain learns? And this grew out of neuroscience research in the 90s in University of California, Irvine, that really kind of looked at this. And one of the things that you mentioned is that basically this is not how to teach math, right? As a simple sort of like how not to do it. This is kind of it's a poster, and it's almost like a poster child for, here is how not to do it. It's basically, okay, here are all the integer rules, memorize these and you'll be fine. Keep change. When you're doing addition, subtract the numbers if they're different signs. First of all, when you're doing addition, you subtract the numbers if they're different signs, then keep the sign of the bigger number, all this stuff, right? It just makes no sense. And what I want to do, I know it's taken us 25 minutes, but I want to look at the game sequence from ST Math, out of the neuroscience research. How can we use a game with the penguin to kind of replace this, right? Because this is exactly the type of stuff that kids are going to be behind on, missing, not understanding. Maybe they were, in seventh grade last year, and this is something that they're really still struggling with. And one of the challenges, of course, is that when you do like a skills-based assessment, effectively, even if a student does really well, you still don't really know what they actually understand. All you know is kind of what skills they can do. And that's almost indistinguishable from really what do they understand. And then, of course, we can actually do something radically different. So this is a game, and it's a fun game. It's a game called Jelly Block. Here's the penguin. This is Gigi, although this is a shadow of Gigi, literally a shadow of his or her former self. And Gigi wants to get to this platform, right? And you can see here we've got this little thing where I can sort of create some more blocks. Let's say as a student, I don't know, I'm like, I'm just going to drag this and go, okay, I guess I get to see what happens. And okay, they get added. All right, Gigi did not make it to the platform, but now I kind of see, and again, not because, notice there's no button to click for instructions, there's no words on the screen apart from the student's name. I know Isaac Newton would have played ST Math if he was still around. So it's like, okay, there's a couple of blocks here, and I guess if I add a few more, maybe something like that, I think, all right, Gigi got to the platform. Okay, so I'm kind of getting it. Okay, I see 5 blocks. I want a few more again, something like that, maybe. And we're going to get to the platform. Okay, this is cool. And now, ooh, okay, I have 10 blocks, but I kind of want to go back a bit. And this is definitely not going to do it, but okay, let me see what happens if I think the natural thing to do here is go, okay, I'm going to choose some of these, right? And okay, fantastic. Created 1 plus -1, zero-sum pairs. So now I've got 3 blocks and I want to go back this way. Okay, so let me try that again. Let's see. I think I want to go back this way. And, ooh, that was interesting. So hang on a minute. Wow, so this is a negative, so this is a minus. Okay, so this is subtracting. So actually, when I did that, it flipped it. So hang on. So actually, I want to subtract got 3. I want to take away 5. Negative sign flips it. Now notice I'm not memorizing any rule. I'm not learning a whole bunch of different rules. The one thing that I've got going on here is that basically, if I have a negative sign attached to the blocks, when it animates out, that negative sign is going to flip the blocks around. And we can do something like this. So right now, I have notionally -2 blocks, right? And I need to get up here. So how am I going to do that? I'm going to subtract some negative blocks, and this negative sign is going to flip the blocks. So a negative is going to be the same as adding a positive, and I can get positive. So notice we've done addition, we've done subtraction, we've done positive numbers, negative numbers, all without memorizing any rules, just this one idea, this central idea, if you like. And Twana, this goes to your point about like kind of a web. If you understand the core underlying concept, basically this idea of like, things flipping, then once you get that, everything kind of comes off it. So here, now we can even do multiplication with this. I can see, all right, I want to get to here. And oh, okay, this means I can drag up, I can drag down. Let's see. Okay, I think maybe something like this. Like basically I can build an area model, and okay, I can get GG here, very nice. Now I need to get to the negative side. So this definitely is not going to do it, but okay, like I know before, this negative sign is going to flip it. So I can use that same model to multiply by negative numbers. Okay, fantastic. Wow, we can even do division here. I don't quite know what's going to happen, but let me see. So we can kind of do a reverse area model and divide. Neat. And now, okay, how am I going to do this? I've got some negative blocks. I can only multiply, and I need to get up there. But again, as I multiply by a negative number, we know that's going to flip the blocks. So again, negative times negative is positive. We can even do funky things like divide by fractions if we're using this reverse area models. I'm not going to get all the way into that right now, but here I've got 6 blocks. If I squish it down where one side is a half, the other side has to be 12. So we can do all of this stuff just using this one basic model of the number line with this flip when things are negative. And what we do in STMath is we move from visual models like that, and then we have the students work symbolically. So now we can sort of go through and we can see, okay, so what was it I was doing? Okay, 2 plus 3, okay. I get where this is happening. So now we've built their understanding. And notice, even when they're working symbolically here, it always animates out from the visual. So we can see this is what the students were actually doing when they were going through and building that deep underlying conceptual understanding. And now we can see how that works symbolically as well. So here, for example, is a positive number, 10, added to a negative number. We do not need to subtract the numbers and take the absolute value and then take the sign of the bigger number. No, we can just go, okay, 10, -7. I can visualize it in my head. I know exactly what's going to happen. And now I can see it. And then literally I get to actually see what I've now kind of learned as these things. So, the big point here is that from this one number line, the whole flipping thing with the negative sort of numbers, that is enough to understand all of these integer operations, multiplication, addition, subtraction, positive, negative numbers, all of it can be understood with one very simple kind of critical idea, this idea that this negative is going to flip this whichever way around it needs to. Oops, except I just got that wrong because I wasn't concentrating because I was having too much fun talking about it. And there we go. I don't necessarily need to go all the way to the end, but you get how we can lead students through something purely visually, and then we can lead them through, and we don't normally do something like this where we lead them through the same puzzles. This is just a really good way of demonstrating kind of what we do in STMath. But we can take students through visual puzzles, then through symbolic puzzles. So they leave completely able to answer this stuff using the symbols, but they have the visual understanding of what is actually happening, behind these concepts. So, Twana, to your point about the connected web, they have all the little nodes, all the little skills, but they also have this central piece that kind of connects all this stuff together, the stickiness, basically. And this is literally what makes it stick, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you could easily forget, okay, hang on a minute, was it do I take the bigger number when it's positive or smaller number when, easy to forget all that stuff. But once you understand something at this kind of real visceral sort of level of like, okay, negative, boom, negative, boom. Okay, there's two of them, so it's going to come back positive. Once you understand how that works, there's nothing to forget. I was lucky when I was a kid. I loved math. I understood it well, and but I never had to really study for tests. And the reason for that was not because I was some super genius or things, because I knew it from the schema upwards. So even if I forgot something in the test, I could just reconstruct the formula because I kind of knew how it worked. And there's just such a huge difference to sort of being able to learn math that way. And Twana, I just want to ask from your sort of experience, especially then at the district level, the fact that we're able to start all ST math sequences, and we do literally without fail, all of them pretty much start visually and then transition to symbolic and then transition to maybe, word problems or things where the students are going to discuss them with the language, but that's very much the last step in the process. Uh, how have you seen that be valuable for kids in the districts that you've worked in and so forth and so on?
It's extremely valuable when you have the rules that kids have to memorize or the procedure they have to remember. They don't own it. They don't feel like they understand it. They're just following the directions like you would like with the recipe or but when they can construct the knowledge themselves, they can make the mistake, and because of the way ST Math works, they can adjust their own thinking. They're like in the driver's seat the whole time. So they're the ones that's constructing the meaning. They're the ones that are building the why. They're building it themselves as they learn and they're figuring it out. And so then it, like you said, sticks. It sticks with them. And that builds the confidence, because if you just give me a formula that I can't memorize and I don't know why it works and I don't know how to apply it or when to apply it, unless you just showed me, then that just reinforces this idea that I can't do math. But if I'm doing something like this that starts visually, and the because we start visually, it gives everyone access. It's not scary for me to try something because it's a visual model and I'm going to see what I did and how it worked. So that allows the access, and then I'm building and constructing that knowledge myself and building that why. So now I've got the confidence to know that I actually can do it. The thing I like to say about ST Math is that we give kids the freedom to fail. And in doing that, they're learning and they're growing, and they're doing that themselves without depending on anybody. They are the authors of their own learning. And that's what makes it powerful. And that's what changes the narrative. And that's what makes kids realize that they are the ones that can do math, that it's not about this memorization thing, but it's about an actual knowing and a learning and a sense making.
I'm going to have to steal that. The kids are the authors of their own learning. I like that a lot. That's very nice. All right, fantastic. So cool. Yeah. Well, I'm going to dive into sort of something else that you'll be a little bit more familiar with, but I think equally kind of really gets at the heart of what you're talking about. So, and this really, you didn't know I was using this, but this is something that you kind of spoke about earlier. This idea that it's so easy to think of math as a list, right? Where it's just like a list of skills. And if I can get the kids to do all these things, then that means they know math. And, this is not how the brain actually stores mathematical information or uses mathematical information, because it actually stores it a little bit more like this, where, like you said, it's really about a web, right? And it's, yes, there are these sort of nodes of understanding, if you like, these little things. But it's really, when we say someone has a conceptual understanding of math, we literally mean they have all these connections. They understand how it hangs together. That web is just as important as the little pieces themselves. And I guess the hard part is that on any kind of test that's basically testing skills, you can't see the web. All you can see is how well somebody does on these nodes. So they could have all these nodes and they'd be really, really, really good at them. And then you do a test and it goes, oh, yeah, they know all this stuff, but they have no web. They have none of that stuff. And I actually, having taught high school, I had kids who made it through to Algebra 2 without a web. I'm telling you, they'd memorized their way through to that point. And suddenly it's like a house of cards. There's only so much kind of keep in there like that. I always remember this one girl who was just in tears one summer. It was a summer school, and she'd failed Algebra 2, and she was in summer school to try and pass in 6 weeks what she, had struggled to do for the whole year, because that's how high school works. And she was kind of begging me, just sort of saying, "Look, tell me what to learn. I will memorize it, and then I will get through the test," because that's how she'd gotten through every single class she'd ever been in. And it was just kind of heartbreaking, because it was so, at the end of the day, at that point, you're kind of looking for, we got to kind of find this web here. We got to sort of see this understanding. That's kind of the whole point. And it was just really difficult. But, kids, they get very used to kind of being able to demonstrate that they can do these things. But it's really all about that web. So, and obviously in K8 and ST Math these days does go from pre-K through to 8. We're trying to build this, basically. We want kids to come out of that with this rich constructed web of ideas. All right, I'm going to do something a little bit more familiar, and I think for those of you who are in ST Math or familiar with ST Math, hopefully this isn't too familiar. Jim, just actually out of curiosity, can you give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you've ever seen this game before? I'm just really curious. You have seen this game before, okay? Then maybe I don't need to do this game, because I really, I see we do have Brit has just joined us as well. She's vanished, so maybe not. Let me dive. So if you have, I am going to skip through this section because that's all right. So let's talk here for a minute. Okay, fantastic. All right, so great. So, and I guess this real has a special relevance at this point in time. And Twana, this kind of speaks to a lot of what you were talking about before. And I know when I was with Los Angeles Unified, we used this chart a lot. We did. I was I guess, a coach of math coaches for quite a while, and at the high and middle school level. And we did a lot of work with a group called the IFL from Pittsburgh, University of Pittsburgh, Peg Smith, and other people whose names I cannot remember because I'm so bad at remembering names. And this whole rigor relevance chart was a big deal. It was something that they used a lot, and they talked about this idea about rich tasks, rigorous math tasks that really fit in this quadrant. So the whole point is here, anytime you're looking at a math task, a curriculum, or anything, you can think about, what type of thinking are the students being asked to do? Are they basically being asked to just sort of memorize things, regurgitate knowledge, or are they being asked to use some degree of, creative thinking, critical thinking, synthesizing ideas, that type of stuff? Similarly, you can also think about, how are the students being asked to apply what they're learning? Are they basically learning something and then just being asked to apply it in a routine way, like multiple times over and over and over again? Or are they being asked to learn something and then apply it in a non-routine way? And the implication, obviously, is that we want kids spending a lot of time up here using creative thinking, synthesizing ideas, solving problems that they have not seen before, non-routine problems. And one of the challenges, big challenges, is that the vast majority of curriculum materials fall very, very, very squarely in this sort of area. And Twana, you already mentioned this, and I'm going to talk about a slightly different problem with this as well right now, and I think you can provide a lot of insight to this. So one of the things that ST Math does so well is it helps all students, and we spoke about the language thing, the fact that we start visually. This for me is the big thing, and this is what I saw when I walked into that classroom for the first time. I saw this happening. I saw kids in this area doing this stuff, and I saw them doing it without a language barrier, right? Which is game-changingly huge. That's the big deal, is we can get kids doing that from the beginning. The other piece that I don't always get a chance to talk about so much, but I think this is really relevant right now, is this quadrant is also really, really difficult for teachers to make happen in the classroom. This is a hard thing to do. I know as a teacher myself, it's hard. I've sat in classrooms where people have taken what we would call rich tasks, well-written tasks, and I've watched them when the kids start struggling. Twana, perhaps you can probably finish my story for me. What happens when you're trying to implement some task here, right? The kids start struggling. What happens in your experience? What have you seen that happens that kind of work? What happens here?
It's what I always tell teachers. It's the run to rescue. So you run to rescue them because you care. You want them to feel
Of
successful. So
course,
we begin asking them questions that lead them in certain directions and reduce the rigor of the task that we were doing
been there,
in
done
the
it,
first place.
done it.
Yeah, me too.
Guilty, guilty.
And we don't like to see kids struggle at all, and so we will give them hints in the way that we ask our questions or funnel our questions to get them to the place that we want them to be. And what that does is it just reduces the rigor of the task in the first place. So
Yes, I'm glad I wasn't alone then in the one who struggled to make that happen in all the people that I was working with, because it was tough. I mean, I actually sat in a classroom one time and I saw a teacher implement an awesome task. It was great. It was a sort of, I think it was an eighth grade class, and they were looking at functions and the sort of, the beginnings of the ideas of functions and patterns and stuff. And they basically were comparing a quadratic, it might have even been an exponential and a linear sort of growth pattern, right? And I think it might have been blocks or something or other. I forget, but I know what the math was. I forget the exact what the task was on the surface. Maybe it was the kind of like, um, would you prefer to have $1 million a day, or a penny on day one, 2 pennies on day two, 4 pennies on day three, 8 pennies on day, that one, right, where the amount doubles but starts at a penny, versus having $1 million a day, and of course it ends up being much, much more, even though it only starts off with a penny. And what I saw happen, unfortunately, was, of course, the kids started struggling. They didn't know what to do. So the teacher basically, after a little bit of time, said, okay, I think what you guys should do is draw a table. So she drew a table up on the front of the class, right? Sort of columns of like, okay. And then, of course, they struggled to fill in what should go in the table. So she'd already sort of basically taken it here. And then it was like, so let's take what was non-routine and make it routine. And now, okay, you're struggling to figure out what to put in the columns. Okay, let me do a couple of columns for you to show you what to do. So now she'd basically taken a task that started off here and it became here, right? And the sad thing is, I see such parallels to this with the way that so many sort of other things are trying to attack learning loss, where they're sort of basically doing this sort of adaptive learning thing where it's like, oh, this is too hard for you. Let's go over here, right? And it's the same thing. It's this running away from rigor, where it's just like, oh, the kids are struggling. Oh, we can't have that. Let's have them do something easier. Let's give them material that's way below grade level, because, like, my gosh, there can be no skill unturned, right? Or no stone unturned. They have to have every single. And it's a similar thing where rigor comes from actually supporting somebody in the challenge, not from helping them run away from that challenge. And I think I know I've heard it expressed really nicely on a couple of occasions, this kind of idea of like, the environment doesn't adapt to you. You have to adapt to the environment, right? And this is kind of the thing where, when it comes to this, if we can help kids get into this space, that's the key, not basically bringing the space to them.
yes,
And I think
yes.
that's one of the things, I remember when I first walked into that classroom and saw that, I instantaneously, well, actually not instantaneously, I tell a lie. When I first saw it, and this was in LA, it was in Audubon Middle School. And I know the first time I saw it, I saw, oh, who's that penguin? Like, what on earth is that? I was a high school math teacher. Don't judge me. I thought Gigi looked like, kind of cute, but like, I was like, oh, really, what's that all about? But then once I saw what the kids were doing here, I was like, oh my God, I got it straight away. And that's, I was like, okay, I got to leave and I got to go and build games with the penguin. So, all right, so that's definitely cool. Like, so this is interesting. And actually, oh no, this came from, not from Massachusetts. This is from New Mexico. Um, but this was very cool, where we were able to look at students doing ST Math, and we were able to also look at their iReady assessment data. So we could basically see, okay, if kids are in, say, fourth grade, and iReady is assessing them at being on grade level, how long do they take on average to get through certain ST math objectives? And some objectives are harder than others. That I could speak harder than others, depending on the content, depending on the type of game, and so forth and so on. So we were able to sort of say, okay, so for the kids who are working and they're assessed at being on grade level, they took this amount of attempts to get through these puzzles. And then we were also able to say, we can see the kids that iReady is assessing at being one grade level behind. They took longer, but they were also able to get through the ST Math content, which Twana goes exactly to your point about this kind of like, because we've removed that language barrier, because we've kind of got this low floor entry, even if they're a grade behind, they didn't have to do different content. They just needed more tries. I think you said this phrase that was really nice, this constructing meaning, right? Constructing. And Elaine, I know I've heard you say something very similar to that before. But this idea of like, it took them longer to construct the meaning, but they still were able to do it. And I think that's the big deal here, right? It's like, and what was interesting here is even kids who were 2 grade levels behind, as assessed by iReady, they were still able to get through. And believe it or not, even kids, and it's like, and there's more, but wait, there's more. Even kids who were 3 grade levels behind here. So basically, kids who were in 4th grade who were being assessed at being at a 1st grade level, yeah, they took double, or slightly over double the amount of time, which is a lot, but they were able to get through and construct the meaning. And I know I've seen, and Twana, I'd give you a minute to sort of think of any sort of exemplars or anecdotes or things connected to this, because I know I've seen this happen with my own kids. Had a fantastic example of the difference between building conceptual understanding and building skills. And I saw my son go through the whole of the ST Math fractions piece, actually the sort of 4th grade stuff actually for fractions. And he totally got it, nailed the fractions piece, and then he hit the mixed numbers bit and he totally got stuck. And what was funny is that he came to me after he'd tried a level 10 times and had gotten really stuck. And it was the first time he'd ever really gotten stuck like that. And it was funny that he came to me after 10 tries, because that's actually when we in the system flag for the teacher that you should probably look at go and help this student right now. And he naturally came to me after 10 tries and was like, I'm getting all upset. And what was fascinating is he was stuck. He was just starting this mixed number thing. And basically, there were 2 circles, both split into 4. 7 of the bits, the segments were shaded. And the question was basically, what fraction is this? And he was putting 7/8 because he saw a total of 8 pieces, 7 of which are shaded. He'd just done the whole fraction thing. So 7 out of 8 are shaded, 7/8. And which is, in fact, great thinking. And I think, Twana, this goes to your point about, well, hang on a minute, maybe they don't have all the skill, but they've probably got a lot you can work with here, right? Because it's not like he's a million miles away from where he needs to be. He, in fact, has all the connected schema right here. He just needed to make that last little and I asked him one question. And I just said, well, how many circles are there? And you could just see this sort of like the light bulb go off, the sort of like the revolutions happen in his brain, and that last piece of schema just went clink, and suddenly it locked in, and he was like, "Oh my god, that's the whole. I get it. Oh, it's 7/4." And basically, mixed numbers now done. Right, the whole concept of mixed numbers is now completely solidified because he'd basically gotten all the way there, but just needed that last little sort of actually discussion, academic discourse, questions that he had,
Yes.
was enough to make that piece happen. And it's so interesting because from a diagnostic assessment perspective, he would have scored exactly the same as someone who had no schema built on that whatsoever, right? So the diagnostic assessment literally can just assess skills, but it doesn't tell you anything about what's actually happening underneath with that. And it's really only when you get into the questions and stuff that you kind of do that. So anyway, sorry, I'm babbling and talking about my kids, but Twana, I was just curious, you know, with this type of stuff or kids kind of building schema, just any sort of thoughts, experiences, things that you've seen that, you could share.
Yeah. There's so many stories of kids. One I'll share to tell on myself. I was talking about how we run to rescue earlier, and I'm guilty of that. Even, now it's hard to watch kids struggle. And I remember one time I was in this fourth grade classroom working with this fourth grade class. And similar to your story about your son, there was this girl and she was playing, I think it was Gigi Cycle, and she was almost there, like almost there. I could see
Hmm.
what she needed to do. And I'm standing behind her and I'm waiting for her to like ask. I mean, she's all these missed attempts. So I'm waiting for her to ask for help. She doesn't. She turns around and she looks at me and I start to say something and she said, "Nope." And I said, "Well, do you need some help?" And she said, "No, I don't need any help. I'm gonna figure this out." And she told me later that when she overcomes a hurdle, when she's struggling, because we call them hurdles in ST math. And what I actually said to the kids when I'm working with them is, you're entering the zone of perseverance when it starts to get hard. She said to me, "It feels like I hit I won the Olympics when I overcome this. So I want to do it." Like, she didn't want my help at all. I really wanted to help her because it was just one thing. I just wanted that one thing. And I just wanted to ask her one question, but she didn't want to hear it. And a while later I talked to the teacher and she said, we were talking about like why the kids want to keep trying, and she said because ST math for them feels like a quest and not a test. And I thought that was really good. And later on, I found out there's this thing called a Super Mario effect. Have you ever heard of that?
Yes, I have. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely.
Yes.
No, please
Okay.
elaborate. I have, but please elaborate on that.
Yeah, and it's this idea that kids, they don't mind the struggle, they don't mind the pits because they know they're going to rescue the princess in the end. So it's all about like the journey that they're on, the quest that they're on. And so when math feels like there's something I'm going to gain at the end of
Mm,
it, and it's this knowledge that I'm going to grow in, then they don't mind like trying and trying again. They don't mind those pits that they fall into because they know in the end they're going to get this new knowledge. And math doesn't always feel that way to them. It
right,
feels sort of
right.
like thing I have to do because people tell me. But when you can frame it like this, and that's what ST Math does really well, you get that Super Mario effect. So I thought that was pretty cool when I learned about that there was such a thing called a Super Mario effect. So
A quest, not a test. All right, you were full of the one-liners today, Twana.
I
It's
know,
just
I
I
know.
love it. A
I have
quest,
a
not a
writer.
test.
What can I say?
Yeah, yeah. No, that is good. But that's really interesting, actually. So there's a guy called Greg Toppo, a journalist. I think he's with the Washington Post. He wrote a really good book called "The Game Believes in You," and it was making a similar point. In fact, I think he actually spoke about the Super Mario effect in that book. But one of the other things he talks about, the central thesis of the book, which is very connected to that, is this kind of idea that kids are happy to struggle in the game because they know it's solvable, right? They just inherently kind of know nobody would build a game. They wouldn't go to that bother if you couldn't actually figure it out. So therefore, there's this sort of implicit kind of contract, if you like, with the game designer of like, you're not really going to build something that isn't possible to do, are you? And of course, we don't want to break that contract either because that would be really bad. But it's a schema that they have. But it means that they're kind of like happy, like you say, to kind of to put that effort in because they know, oh, this is doable. I might not know how to do it yet, but this is a scalable mountain, and I think that kind of is a very similar kind of idea to that Super Mario effect. So awesome! That's a quest, not a test. All right, I'm getting my one-liners out today. All right, and actually, this I think, Twana, this obviously, it kind of speaks to what you were talking about, and we've obviously done a bunch of student surveys over the years, and you've probably seen much more recent ones than me, actually. But this is something we do hear from students a lot. And you're talking about the anecdote where the little girl told you precisely that. I've heard exactly that same thing from kids. They get that, and they like it because it's hard. They don't. It's not that they like it because it's easy. They like it because specifically it's challenging. I actually sat in a classroom with it was again a different school in South Central LA, and I forget exactly which school it was. Well, there are a few. I mean, how many schools in Los Angeles Unified? 730 something. Anyway, I forget. But and I sat in this third grade classroom, and this little girl again spent 20 something minutes, and this was on Big Seed, so it was one of the challenge games, and she spent 20 minutes on one puzzle. And when she solved that puzzle, she let out a yell in a classroom. I've not heard a yell like that in a classroom, right? It was pretty spectacular. So they do, yeah, they get that they're learning from it being difficult. And then I think this is the study that really speaks to that, the fact that, they found, oh, sorry, it looks like our landscape gardener has just arrived with the leaf blower, which is in the garage, which means I can't hear anything. Hopefully you guys can't hear any too much background noise. No, you're
No.
lucky. I can. Anyway, but this study was so cool, and it actually showed in a randomized controlled study published in a journal, kind of what you were saying, that this can actually impact students' self-belief of themselves as mathematicians. So it's a real, big kind of key point there. All right, so I guess we'll sort of dive to the end with a couple of closing points, and certainly for me, I guess the big thing that we're trying to do, and I've been now with STMath for 11 years, done a lot of game design in that time and a lot of R&D on sort of new program features, which Twana is now using as you're building new programs and so forth and so on, and Elaine too. And, this whole idea that the old way of teaching math was really to make you do it like a machine. And what we're really about now is we want kids to understand it so they can build the machines. I mean, that's the future. That's where we need to go. And I'm going to wrap it with our mission statement, which, if I can get it to go up, is this: to ensure that all students are mathematically equipped to solve the world's most challenging problems. And Twana, I'm going to throw it to you. If you've got any closing thoughts, things you just want to sort of share at the end. And I want to thank everybody for being with us.
Yeah, I would just end by saying that the helping kids understand that they can learn is such a powerful thing that nobody can ever take away from them. And that's what I
Right.
love about what we do. We're giving them a gift. We're helping them uncover something about themselves that for whatever reason they feel like they can't do it. And of course there are kids who believe they're really good at math, and they are really good at math and they can do it, but I'm talking about those kids that sit in the classroom thinking that they can't go into a STEM career, or that math is not for them, or all the things that, and every bad grade, every time they make a mistake, that just reinforces that. And what I've seen STMath do over the years working in schools is it gives kids like this new way of thinking about themselves mathematically, and it opens a door, and I've never seen anything do anything like that. And so I just would
Right.
close by saying helping kids understand that they are mathematical is one of the best things that we can do. And so I just appreciate everybody who came today to hear our conversation.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. And I guess we will close right there. So thank you all very much indeed. And if anybody has any questions, please don't hesitate to ask.